Hi guys, Max here, and this video we're going to take a quick look at the war in Ukraine, what's happened over the last few days on the ground, and what we might expect in the future. We'll start with the things that we know are the case for sure, the verifiable facts, and then I'll give my opinion on what's happening towards the end. So it's been a few days since we last spoke about this, so what is the situation on the ground? Well, actual fighting has slowed down a bit over the last few days, and there has been no real progress in the advance of Russian troops. The last video I made on this was 4 days ago, and the points of contact are still mostly the same. This map, for instance, comes from British intelligence, the Ministry of Defence, and it is very likely accurate, but it does miss some intricacies. This map here shows another pretty good, fair representation of the ground held by Russian forces and Ukrainian forces, and it has a lot more detail, so I'm going to use this one. Now, pretty much the same as we saw a week ago, Russian forces are north and west of Kiev, but they're not actually in the city. Hardly any of even the surrounding towns have been taken over either. Russian forces are pretty much just incapable of pushing through. Chernihiv, further north, is still held by Ukrainian army as well. Russians do control the north, the west and the east, but the city is not quite surrounded and it is still being supplied. Now, one of the only real points of advance that Russian forces have made over the last few days is coming from the east, from Sumy towards Kiev, and that convoy that we've known about for a while now has made slow but steady progress, and it is now at the outskirts of Kiev, where it's seeing resistance from Ukrainian forces, and this advance has now stopped. Now, on a random note, there is some pretty incredible footage of an ambush of Russian forces, that convoy that I just spoke about, by the Ukrainian army, about 20 kilometers northeast of Kiev on my Twitter. Link is in the description. It is now 3 days old, so Russian forces have been there just outside the city for about 3 days now, but they have not advanced through that point at all. They still can't get really into the suburbs or the city itself. Now, that convoy north of Kiev that we'd been hearing lots about, some said it was 10 miles long, some said it was as large as 70. It has mostly cleared up, and Russian forces have moved into villages and forests and off the roads, but they are not attacking Kiev in force yet. Now, lots of people had been claiming that this convoy is there as backup, waiting for Kiev to be encircled before they will attack the city, but I actually think that's quite unlikely. Russian forces now have been trying to push south of Kiev from that western point for over a week now, and they've been unable to. This convoy is more likely reinforcements to help encircle Kiev in the first place, rather than to just wait until it is encircled. That is just my opinion, I might be wrong, but that makes far more sense than them just waiting there for the city to be encircled before then attacking. Now, over to the east of the country in Sumy, it's the same situation as we saw a few days ago. The city is almost enveloped, but not entirely so. Ukrainian army in the city are still being supplied, and the Russian forces are unable to actually move into the city themselves. The resistance from the Ukrainian soldiers is just too strong. A little bit further east again, and we have almost the exact same situation before as with Kharkiv as well. Russian forces control land north and east of the city, but nothing in the city itself. They control some unimportant villages, but nothing major. Russian forces have again been incapable of moving into the city, not for lack of trying, let's make note. There is plenty of footage out there of Russian forces being engaged within the outskirts of Kharkiv. Again, it's on my Twitter if you're interested, if you want evidence for what I'm saying. As for the Donbass, there has actually been some advance here, a small Russian push from Luhansk in the north. Nothing too major though, the progress has mostly been a bit slow, and there hasn't been any strong points of defense along the way by the Ukrainian army, so there's not been any real resistance. Now, for the invasion that came from Crimea, the one that has seen the most success out of all of the Russian invasions of this war, and the one I was personally watching very closely, just by looking at a map, you can see that they've taken most of the land from this invasion point. They even took Kherson, a major city, and the only really big important city that Russian forces have taken, though it was taken mostly peacefully with no real resistance from Ukrainian forces. Now, we left off 4 days ago worried about that advance westwards from Crimea towards Mykolaiv and Odessa. I said very clearly that Mykolaiv seems to have far more Ukrainian army forces in the city defending it, so this advance that has until that point been quite fast will probably slow down here, and this would basically be the point which proves to us whether Russian forces and their success in the south was due to a lack of resistance by the Ukrainian army or from more competent, effective Russian forces. Now, in my opinion, that has mostly been answered. It's been 5 days and Mykolaiv has held up quite easily. The Russian forces there have made zero progress over the last 5 days. Now, we heard rumors of a naval invasion of Odessa. We had some early reports a couple of weeks ago of Russian special forces in Odessa, but it was unclear if it was true or not. There was a lot of fog of war, and it could have been misinformation from either side. But Odessa is definitely a target. It's a major, very important city, but it is still completely in the hands of the Ukrainian army, and it's not under any immediate threat. Now, to the east of the Crimean invasion, the other point which was of serious interest was the city of Mariupol, which was and still is surrounded. The city has actually been surrounded for almost a week now, and the Russian forces are attacking the Ukrainian army in that city and trying to take it. Again, there is loads of footage of this online that has been geolocated, but once again, same sort of story. There hasn't really been any real progress made by Russian forces in getting into the city and displacing or destroying the Ukrainian army. Now, for this city here, this specific siege, we have a map that actually comes from a pro-Russian source, and it is now 1 day old as well, but it is probably fairly accurate, and it gives a good idea of the state of the city and how much progress, how much of the city is controlled by which side. Now, the other reason I'm showing this map is because Mariupol is surrounded, as I said, and they are not being supplied. The Ukrainian forces are not able to get supplies into the city, and yet this pro-Russian source shows very clearly that actually the Russians aren't encircling the entire city. Now, people have this weird idea that this is World War I and that there are strict lines of control and there's a man guarding every inch of it, but it isn't like that at all. It's more like soft zones of control. And I think this map actually does a really important thing in explaining how different this kind of warfare is to what we might have in our minds, where every inch of land is fought over and every inch of land has a man guarding it, and you can't sneak past enemy lines or you can't resupply a city like this. We have seen footage that proves that Ukrainian forces are trying to supply the soldiers stuck in Mariupol, but they are being unsuccessful. They are not making it through Russian lines. Nonetheless, though, Ukrainian soldiers in Mariupol are fighting very fiercely and holding Russian forces off. No real progress has been made into the city, as you can see a little bit on the east, and this is a pro-Russian source, let's remember. Now, if the war goes on for months, Mariupol will almost definitely fall, because eventually there will be no more rockets, bullets and food for the defenders, unlike the other cities like Kharkiv or Sumy, which are not surrounded and cut off. Now, really, that is the state on the ground itself. There have been some small changes over the last 4 days, but nothing major. As for casualties, they have actually slowed down a bit as well. Russian forces have been attacking these cities a little bit less, but they are still making some attempts. Now, the Ukrainian army claims the following casualties inflicted for the Russians. More than 12,000 Russians killed, wounded or captured. For Russian material destroyed, 58 planes, 83 helicopters, 360 main battle tanks, 135 artillery pieces, 1,200 armoured personnel carriers, 60 multiple launch rocket systems, 585 unarmoured vehicles, 60 fuel tanks and 33 anti-aircraft systems. Now, the US claims that there are an estimated 6,000 Russian dead, which is likely accurate, and Ukraine claimed 300 to 400 Russian captured. It's unclear right now, as the situation is of course constantly evolving and communication isn't perfect. These numbers are actually very likely to be accurate guesses, to be honest. Material losses are far easier to verify though, and these numbers also seem very accurate. As for Ukrainian losses, we still don't know anything about the material side. That information is being held very close to the chests of the Ukrainians to not give it out to the Russians to give them an advantage. We do now know that at least 1,300 Ukrainian soldiers are killed. The number is actually probably quite a lot higher than this. Many soldiers will be missing and dead but unknown, and in places like Mariupol, communication is very difficult to get out to the rest of the country, so numbers will have a major lag. Now, that there is all actually pretty much factual. A few of my opinions scattered about, but most of that there is pretty standard information that is widely accepted to be the most likely outcome and the most likely reality. As for my opinion on the war as a whole, the Russian invasion has stalled. Attacks on huge cities has slowed down massive amounts, and now they are really just bombing them to preserve their losses. Russian forces started actually losing loads of aircraft as well. Again, there is loads of footage of this available online, verified stuff, geolocated, timestamped, so they've pulled back their air force and they're flying far fewer sorties than they used to. Russia is having to reorganize, rearm and resupply as their logistics is in shambles, and Russia just can't take those cities with their current strategies. They have to change tact, or they have to increase their numbers, or they will not be able to advance anymore. By all accounts actually, Russia expected to win the war within 3 days or so. They expected 1 or 2 minor fights in Kiev or Kharkiv to win pretty easily, and then for Ukraine to surrender and for Zelensky to fly out the country and give up. But that didn't happen, and the war is proven far harder than what Russia and literally everyone else thought it would be. We all massively overestimated the effectiveness of Russian forces, myself included. Even the British Army and the US Armed Forces expected Ukraine to lose this war within 3 days, but they've put up super strong resistance for two main reasons. Firstly, they are very well equipped by very advanced, effective Western weapons like Javelin missiles, NLAW rockets, and Stingers and other manpads, which are sufficient to destroy any Russian equipment. Secondly, Ukrainian forces are incredibly well motivated. They are fighting for their homeland and their families, and they're very willing to die and put their lives on the line for the cause. The Russian forces are the complete opposite. They don't really want to be there. Many of them are conscripts. They have poor morale and they don't want to die in a foreign country for no real reason. Now, a brilliant example of this difference in morale and effectiveness is the ambush I posted on my Twitter. We see Ukrainian armed forces ambush a far superior number of Russian forces, basically a death sentence. It was an example of incredible bravery, and we see Russian forces just run away despite being clearly the superior force. Running away from the ambush also goes directly against all military doctrine and Russian military doctrine as well. Their training went out of the window and they ran. You can watch the video yourself. I explained on a thread down below why what they did is the wrong thing to do. But the video is extremely high quality footage and it's geolocated to a village about 20 kilometers northeast of Kiev. Now, the extent to which the West has overestimated the effectiveness of Russian forces is ridiculous, and an example of this is some wargaming that was carried out by British Army a few months ago, and it came out to the result that if Russia attacked the UK and the British Army would only last 3 days before it collapsed, which is clearly far too pessimistic. To be perfectly frank, the British Army alone would instantly turn the tide of war in Ukraine and would send Russian forces packing. Another example of this overestimation of Russian forces comes directly from Russia itself. Putin has gone on record time after time claiming that he could take Warsaw within 3 days of World War III coming out, and he would be in Spain within 2 weeks. Now, frankly, I think that a 100-mile-away capital in Kiev, which you have surrounded on 3 sides, if you can't take that within 2 weeks, there's no way in hell of you taking the entirety of Europe. Now, why has everyone overestimated Russian forces so much and underestimated Western forces and Western equipment? Well, no one knows for sure yet. This will take years of research and thought and experiments to know for sure, but my opinion, it's mainly due to the 2 different types of military-industrial complexes in the East and the West, because yes, actually there is a military-industrial complex in Russia as well. Now, in the US, the UK, and the rest of NATO really, armed forces hype up the effectiveness of the enemy and downplay their own effectiveness of themselves, and it's all to try and get more funding for themselves, more money, better equipment, more tanks, more planes, and things like that, stuff that they want from government budgets. In the East, though, in places like Russia, it's the complete opposite. Their armed forces hype themselves up to try and ensure that the West doesn't push for any kind of confrontation because they would be so scared to face the Russians. They did this when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 and Crimea again in 2014. Basically, the West was terrified of a war with Russia because of the way the Russian army portrayed itself, so they just didn't put up any resistance and they allowed Russia to carry out its aims. Then at the same time as that, we have the fact that there is loads of corruption in Russia. Military rations, for example, that expired 10 years ago are being given to soldiers who are invading Ukraine, probably because money for those rations has been siphoned off by generals to buy super yachts and villas in Italy. The state of the equipment that the Russians are using in Ukraine is also really poor and not at all up to scratch with what it should be given Russia's military budget, because most of this money gets siphoned off by oligarchs and generals and spent on consumer goods. Now, I am of course not 100% sure that this is the case, but I am pretty sure it's a major factor in explaining why Russia has done so poorly and the Ukrainian army has done so well. Now, on a quick note, the idea that this invasion has gone to plan is frankly utterly ludicrous. I will do a full-length video on this alone at some point, but the argument carries no weight at all. This is a near worst-case scenario for Russia, and they have clearly expected something like Georgia in 2008 or Crimea in 2014, where there's either very little resistance at all or literally no resistance, no death, no fighting, just an increase in Russian influence and a regime change and a big win for Putin. Of course, though, it hasn't worked out that way. One other very quick caveat, I know a lot of people think that this is just a finance channel, but actually I'm a little bit qualified to talk about this. I have a degree in military history and I've been interested in the military my entire life, and come 14 months time, come May next year, I will be joining the British Army myself. So I do feel like I might have at least some kind of insight into what's going on here. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to bless the YouTube algorithm. If you want more content like this, then check out our Patreon and join our community of investors. You get access to our Discord, loads of exclusive content like insight into my portfolio and buy and sell alerts for all my own investments. There's a link in the description to masterworks.io, a site that allows you to buy fractional shares of art from world-famous artists like Banksy, which can be a great way to diversify your portfolio with non-market correlated assets. It's completely free to sign up, so if that sounds interesting, then make sure to check it out. There's also a link in the description to BlockFi, which will give you up to $250 in free Bitcoin when you use it. You can also get 9% interest on stablecoins like USDC, which is a far higher rate than you get from any savings account these days. Just make sure not to use Tether. Thank you all for the support. Thanks for watching. Stay stoic. Until next time.